Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we are going to study paper 154, The Last Days at Capernaum. And that starts on page 1717, or paper 154 is your limit. So let's say a little prayer and we'll get started. Father, thank you for bringing us together again tonight to study this wonderful revelation. Pray that you'll open our hearts and minds tonight, that we might learn something tonight and share it with others. Pray that you'll be with us on this stormy night and keep our connection together so that we can stay going tonight. It's kind of stormy out here. So we thank you for this opportunity, and we thank you for this group, and we thank you for all that attend and all those who watch online our videos, and we pray that they're blessed in this effort to learn more about your Creator, Son, Michael, Jesus of Nazareth. We say this and it will be done. Amen. Okay, last days at Capernaum. On the eventful Saturday night of April 30th, as Jesus was speaking words of comfort and courage to his downcast and bewildered disciples, at Tiberias, a council was being held between Herod Antipas and a group of special commissioners representing the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. These scribes and Pharisees urged Herod to arrest Jesus, and they did their best to convince him that Jesus was stirring up the populace to dissension and even to rebellion. But Herod refused to take action against him as a political offender. Herod's advisors had correctly reported the episode across the lake when the people sought to proclaim Jesus king and how he rejected the proposal. So the Sanhedrin representatives tried to convince Herod to go ahead and arrest Jesus as a political prisoner first, or a political offender, and then later on they try to convince him he's a religious offender. So, all right. Yeah. Oh. The Sanhedrin is basically the head priests of the Jewish faith. They're in Jerusalem. Okay, so they're in charge. They're basically over all the synagogues in Jerusalem. They are not supposed to have power over the synagogues outside of Jerusalem, but they assume this power, and we'll find this out in a later slide tonight. So, all right, so they're the chief priests and stuff, mostly Pharisees.
One of Herod's official family, Chitza, whose wife belonged to the women's ministry and poor, had informed him that Jesus did not propose to meddle with the affairs of earthly rule, that he was only concerned with the establishment of the spiritual brotherhood of his believers, which brotherhood he called the kingdom of heaven. Herod had confidence in Chitza's reports, so much so that he refused to interfere with Jesus' activities. Herod was also influenced at this time in his attitude towards Jesus by his superstitious fear of John the Baptist. Herod was one of those apostate Jews who, while he believed nothing, feared everything. He had a bad conscience for having put John to death, and he did not want to become entangled in these intrigues against Jesus. He knew of many cases of sickness which had been apparently healed by Jesus, and he regarded him as either a prophet or a relatively harmless religious fanatic.
Okay, so let's figure out who this Chitza is. She is not Herod's wife, the one that had Jesus had John the Baptist put to death, right? She is a relative of his wife, and she belonged to the women's ministering corps. All right, so that's important to note that. Also, Herod was basically afraid of everything. Okay, superstitious wise. So he didn't want anything to do with maybe putting Jesus to death too, after the terrible thing that happened with John, right? So he's already in bad standing, and he didn't want to get any worse. So because of this family member explaining to him what they called the kingdom of heaven, he really didn't want to do anything about Jesus and his followers, right? He didn't want to get any more trouble, basically. All right, Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. When the Jews threatened to report the Caesar he was serving a traitorous subject, Herod ordered them out of his council chamber. Thus matters rested for 1 week, during which time Jesus prepared his followers for the impending his person.
Okay, so Herod was hoping this would take care of it, and it didn't, right? Stephen, would you take the next one, please?
Okay, a week of council. From May 1st to May 7th, Jesus held intimate council with the followers at the Zebedee house. Only the tried and trusted disciples were admitted to these conferences. At this time, there were only about 100 disciples who had moral courage to brave the opposition of the Pharisees and openly declare their adherence to Jesus. With this group, he had set up evening. Small companies of inquiries assembled each afternoon by the seaside, where some of the evangelists and apostles discoursed to him. These groups seldom numbered more than 50.
Okay, so it was the closest group, right? The ones that really believed in Jesus. All right, Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Okay. On Friday of this week, official action was taken by the rulers of the Capernaum synagogue, closing the house of God to Jesus and all of his followers. This action was taken at the instigation of the Jerusalem Pharisees. Jairus resigned as chief ruler and openly aligned himself with Jesus.
Okay, so Jairus refused to go along with this, and he was the chief ruler, so he aligned himself with Jesus openly after this because of the closing of the synagogues, right? And it's kind of humorous to think about it, that the house of God is close to Jesus and his followers, and it is Jesus is the representative of God. You know, it's kind of amusing in itself.
Well, ironic.
Ironic, that's right. Millie, would you take the next one?
Yes. The last of the seaside meetings was held on Sabbath afternoon, May 7th. Jesus talked to less than 150 who had assembled at that time. This Saturday night marked the time of the lowest ebb in the tide of popular regard for Jesus and his teachings. From then on, there was a steady, slow, but more healthful and dependable growth in favorable sentiment. A new following was built up, which was better grounded in spiritual faith and true religious experience. The more or less composite and compromising transition stage between the materialistic concepts of the kingdom held by the Master's followers and those more idealistic and spiritual concepts taught by Jesus had now definitely ended. From now on, there was a more open proclamation of the gospel of the kingdom in its larger scope and in its far-flung spiritual implications.
So the materialistic people that were following him and wanted just to see the miracles and free food and that sort of stuff kind of fell off. And now a more spiritually based faith group was developing around Jesus and becoming more of his followers. 2, a week of rest. Sunday, May 8th, AD 29, at Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin passed a decree closing all the synagogues of Palestine to Jesus and his followers. This was a new and unprecedented usurpation of authority by the Jerusalem Sanhedrin. Theretofore, each synagogue had existed and functioned as an independent congregation of worshipers and was under the rule and direction of its own board of governors. Only the synagogues of Jerusalem had been subject to the authority of the Sanhedrin. This summary action of the Sanhedrin was followed by the resignation of 5 of its members. 100 messengers were immediately dispatched to convey and enforce this decree. Within the short space of 2 weeks, every synagogue in Palestine had bowed to this manifesto of the Sanhedrin except the synagogue at Hebron. The rulers of the Hebron synagogue refused to acknowledge the right of the Sanhedrin to exercise such jurisdiction over their assembly. This refusal to secede to the Jerusalem decree was based on their contention of congregational autonomy rather than on sympathy with Jesus' cause. Shortly thereafter, the Hebron synagogue was destroyed by fire. It looks a little fishy, doesn't it? But 5 of the chief members of the Sanhedrin resigned, and then Hebron refused to honor this because they felt like it was unfair for the Sanhedrin to do this in the first place. But they still did not sympathize with Jesus. Right?
The same Sunday morning, Jesus declared a week's holiday, urging all of his disciples to return to their homes or friends to rest their troubled souls and speak words of encouragement to their loved ones. He said, "Go to your several places to play or fish while you pray for the extension of the kingdom."
Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
This week of rest enabled Jesus to visit many families and groups about the seaside. He also went fishing with David Zebedee on several occasions. And while he went about alone much of the time, there always lurked nearby 2 or 3 of David's most trusted messengers, who had no uncertain orders from their chief respecting the safeguarding of Jesus. There was no public teaching of any sort during this period of rest.
And then let me refresh y'all's memory about who David Zebedee was. Remember, David Zebedee was the son of the Zebedee boat shop that Jesus worked at, right? And David took the responsibility of taking care of Jesus' finances, right? And when he chose his apostles, David did not feel like he was a preacher or a teacher, either one. So he took the responsibility on himself to set up this messenger corps, okay? So that all the believers and Jesus could keep in touch with everything that was going on throughout all Palestine. And he did this on his own, okay? Without anybody telling him to. He did not feel like he could be an apostle, but he worked a function that was just as important as the apostles, right? And he was the one that made sure that Jesus' family were taken care of too, right? Stephen.
This week was the week that Nathaniel and James Zebedee suffered from more than a slight illness. For 3 days and nights they were acutely afflicted with painful digestive disturbance. On the 3rd night, Jesus sent Salome, James' mother, to her rest while he ministered to his suffering apostles. Of course, Jesus could have instantly healed these 2 men, but that is not the method of either the Son or the Father in dealing with these commonplace difficulties and afflictions of the children on the evolutionary world and tricks. Never once throughout all of his eventful life in the flesh did Jesus engage in any sort of supernatural ministration to the members of his earth family or in behalf of any one of his immediate followers.
Okay, so right here is where it says that the Son and the Father, neither one normally intervene in our normal sicknesses. You see that? Okay.
Mhm.
That these are things we have to go through on earth like every other being, every other mortal, right? And that's just not the way that Jesus or God does things normally. So when he did healing, it was an exception, right? Especially the miracles. Okay? And this is where it explains that. Bill, would you take the next one?
Okay? Universe difficulties must be met, and planetary obstacles must be encountered as part of the experience training provided for the growth and development, the progressive perfection of the evolving souls of mortal creatures. The spiritualization of the human soul requires intimate experience with the educational solving of a wide range of real universe problems. The animal nature and the lower forms of world creatures do not progress favorably in environmental view. Problematic situations coupled with exertion stimuli conspire to produce those activities of mind, soul, and spirit which contribute mightily to the achievement of worthy goals of moral progression and to the attainment of higher levels of spirit destiny.
So a life of ease and everything taken care of for you is not the way of God, right? The part of our experience is the struggles of life, right? Both sickness and everything else, right?
This is kind of really saying, basically, the majority of the church teaching are just false in that regard.
Yeah, it is, Stephen.
They're constantly going materialistic.
That's right, yeah. When we go to church just to expect a healing, for instance, that's putting oneself in place of everyone else. And we have to deal with these problems in life on our own, right? We can ask for God's support, but God does not normally step in and take care of these illnesses for us, right? It's part of our responsibility as with doctors and healthcare providers and everything. Part of our learning process is learning, our doctors and our nurses and our scientists learning how to take care of these things themselves. Okay? That's the way it should be addressed. And I don't think that's done enough, but that's my opinion. Miller, would you take the next one?
Yes. Number 3, the Second Annual Conference. On May 16, the Second Conference at Tiberias began between the authorities in Jerusalem and Herod Antipas was convened. Both the religious and political leaders from Jerusalem were in attendance. The Jewish leaders were able to report to Herod that practically all the synagogues in both Galilee and Judea were closed to Jesus' teachings. A new effort was made to have Herod place Jesus under arrest, but he refused to be removed. On May 18, however, Herod did agree to the plan of committing the Sanhedrin authorities to seize Jesus and carry him to Jerusalem to be tried on religious charges, provided the Roman rulers of Judea concurred in the arrangement. Meanwhile, Jesus' enemies were industriously spreading the rumor throughout Galilee that Herod had become hostile to Jesus and that he meant to exterminate all who believed in his teaching.
And that was not true, was it? But he did set it up so that the Sanhedrin could arrest Jesus on religious charges, and that's how he came before the Roman authorities, right?
Like we first got fake news.
Yeah, that's how we got the first fake news, that's right.
I find it amusing that they use, put that page back up again.
All right.
They use the term, they refused to, they did, Herod did agree to have permitting the Sanhedrin authority to seize Jesus and carry him to Jerusalem to be tried. That's so southern.
Yeah.
Carry him someplace. I was the first that heard my daughter using that term after we were in Europe, and she had come home to Georgia, and all of a sudden she's using all this kind of language. But we don't carry people places.
Maybe they were Southern Jews, Billy.
And that's it. Herod Jerusalem.
True. On Saturday night, May 21st, word reached Tiberius that the civil authorities at Jerusalem had no objection to the agreement between Herod and the Pharisees that Jesus be seized and carried to Jerusalem for trial before the Sanhedrin on charges of flouting the sacred laws of the Jewish nation. Accordingly, just before midnight of this day, Herod signed the decree which authorized the officers of the Sanhedrin to seize Jesus within Herod's domains and forcibly to carry him to Jerusalem for trial. Strong pressure from many sides was brought to bear upon Herod before he consented to grant his permission, and he well knew that Jesus could not expect a fair trial before his bitter enemies at Jerusalem. So he knew when he granted what they requested that he was doomed, pretty much.
Sounds like what's going on today.
Yeah, really. I guess that would make us very guilty in the Sanhedrin's eyes, huh?
Mm.
4, Saturday night in Capernaum. On this same Saturday night in Capernaum, a group of 50 leading citizens met at the synagogue to discuss the momentous question, what shall we do with Jesus? They talked and debated until after midnight, but they could not find any common ground for agreement. Aside from a few persons who inclined to the belief that Jesus might be the Messiah, at least a holy man, or perhaps a prophet, the meeting was divided into 4 nearly equal groups who held, respectively, the following views of Jesus.
And this is what they came up with. Rodney, did you read these 4?
Yes, 1, that he was a deluded and harmless religious fanatic. 2, that he was a dangerous and deciding agitator who might strike revolt. 3, that he was in league with devils and might even be the prince of devils. And 4, that he was beside himself, that he was mad, mentally imbalanced.
Insulting.
It's pretty insulting, yeah. That's
Yeah.
Steve.
Okay. There was much talk about Jesus preaching doctrines which were upsetting to common people. His enemies maintained that the teachings were impractical, and everything was good pieces if everybody made an honest effort to live in according with his ideas. And men of many subsequent generations have said the same thing. Many intelligent and well-meaning men, even in the more enlightened age of these revelations, maintain that modern civilization has not been built upon the teachings of Jesus. And they are partially right, but all such doubt forget that a much better civilization could have been built upon his teachings, and someday will be. This world will never seriously carry out the teachings of Jesus on a large scale, notwithstanding that half-hearted attempts have often been made to follow the doctrines of the so-called Christianity.
Okay, the doctrines of the so-called Christianity are not the teachings of Jesus, is what the point they're making here, right? And the other point they're making here is that someday civilization will be based upon the teachings of Jesus. And that's why it's so important for us to teach these papers, right? That people understand the teachings of Jesus and they can be prepared for that age to come. Not the doom and gloom that we believe is going to happen to this planet, but an age to come where we reach the age of light and life, right?
But there's also, when we look at that, okay, there's a reason behind that. And really, it's like when they come up with, we're waiting for the Messiah to come, man no longer was looking. Now he's waiting for the Messiah to come.
Right.
We've never really looked at Jesus' teaching, declared him as being God, recognized that what he said is true, and then try to become obedient to that truth.
Yeah.
And if we can do that, we're not going to stand truth on this planet.
Yeah. That's true.
Now, that's part of John 3:19,
Yeah.
relative darkness.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Okay? 5. The eventful Sunday morning. May 22nd was an eventful day in the life of Jesus. On this Sunday morning, before daybreak, one of David's messengers arrived in great haste from Siberia, bringing the word that Herod had authorized, or was about to authorize, the arrest of Jesus by the officers of the Sanhedrin. The receipt of the news of this impending danger caused David's deputy to arouse his messengers and send them out to all the local groups of disciples, summoning them for an emergency council at 7 o'clock that morning. When the sister-in-law of Jude, Jesus' brother, heard this alarming report, she hastened word to all of Jesus' family who dwelt nearby, summoning them forthwith to assemble at Zebedee's house. And in response to this hasty call, presently there were assembled Mary, James, Joseph, Jude, and Ruth.
All right. So everybody's been notified. All right. Okay. Miller, would you take the next one?
At this early morning meeting, Jesus imparted his farewell instructions to the assembled disciples. That is, he bade them farewell for the time being, knowing well they would soon be dispersed from Capernaum. He directed them all to seek God for guidance and to carry on the work of the kingdom regardless of consequences. The evangelists were to labor as they saw fit, until such time as they might be called. He selected 12 evangelists to accompany him. The 12 apostles he directed to remain with him. No matter what happened. The 12 women he instructed to remain at Zebedee's house and at Peter's house until he should send for them.
All right. So we got 12 of the evangelists and 12 of the apostles, and the women's corps, 12, was to stay at Zebedee's house and Peter's house. All right. Jesus consented to David Zebedee's continuing his countrywide messenger service, and in bidding the master farewell, presently David said, "Go forth to do your work, master. Don't let the bigots catch you, and never doubt that the messengers will follow after you. My men will never lose contact with you, and through them you shall know the kingdom in other parts, and by them we will all know about you. Nothing that might happen to me will interfere with this service, for I have appointed first and second leaders, even third. I am neither a teacher nor a preacher, but it is my heart to do this, and no one can stop me." That's the conviction of David Zebedee. He ended up going to the church in Philadelphia eventually. So, yeah, with that in mind. Okay.
About 7:30 this morning, Jesus began his parting address to almost 100 believers who had crowded indoors to hear him. This was a solemn occasion for all present, but Jesus seemed unusually cheerful. He was once more like his normal self. The seriousness of weeks had gone, and he inspired all of them with his words of faith, hope, and courage.
So as far as Jesus was concerned, all this has already been settled, and he's doing what he's supposed to be doing. Right? Hard. Rodney, did you take the next one?
All right. Jesus' family arrives. It was about 8 o'clock on this Sunday morning when 5 members of Jesus' Earth family arrived on the scene in response to the urgent summons of Jude's sister-in-law. Of all his family in the flesh, only one, Ruth, believed wholeheartedly and continuously in the divinity of his mission on earth. Jude and James, and even Joseph, still retained much of their faith in Jesus, but they had permitted pride to interfere with their better judgment and real spiritual inclinations. Mary was likewise torn between love and fear, between mother love and family pride. Though she was harassed by doubts, she could never quite forget the visit of Gabriel ere Jesus was born. The Pharisees had been laboring to persuade Mary that Jesus was beside himself. He meant it. They urged her to go with her sons and seek to dissuade him from further efforts at public teaching. They assured Mary that soon Jesus' health would break, and that only dishonor and disgrace would come upon the entire family as a result of allowing him to go on. And so, when the word came from Jude's sister-in-law, all 5 of them started at once for Zebedee's house, having been together at Mary's home, where they had met with the Pharisees the evening before. They had talked with the Jerusalem leaders long into the night, and were more or less convinced that Jesus was acting strangely, that he had acted strangely for some time. While Ruth could not explain all of his conduct, she insisted that he had always treated his family fairly and refused to agree to the program of trying to dissuade him from further work.
So only Ruth stayed by his side. The rest of them all thought he was losing his mind in that sense. Right? Stephen, would you take the next one?
Okay. On the way to Zebedee's house, they talked these things over and agreed among themselves to try to persuade Jesus to come home with them. For, said Mary, I know it would influence my son if he would only come home and listen to me. James and Jude had heard rumors concerning the plans to arrest Jesus and take him to Jerusalem for trial. They also feared for their own safety. As long as Jesus was a popular figure in the public eye, his family allowed matters to drift along. But now that people of Capernaum and the leaders at Jerusalem had suddenly turned against him, they began keenly to feel the pressure of the supposed disgrace of their embarrassing.
He's worried about their own pride more than what the mission of Jesus was. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Bill, would you take the next one?
Okay? They had expected to meet Jesus, take him aside, and urge him to go home with them. They had thought to assure him that they would forget his neglect of them. They would forgive and forget. If he would only give up the foolishness of trying to preach a new religion, which could bring only trouble to himself and dishonor upon his family. To all of this, Ruth would only say, I will tell my brother that I think he is a man of God, and that I hope he would be willing to die before he would allow these wicked Pharisees to stop his preaching. Joseph promised to keep Ruth quiet while the others labored with Jesus.
So Ruth wholeheartedly believed in Jesus' mission, didn't she? Billy, would you take the next one?
When they reached the Zebedee house, Jesus was in the very midst of delivering his parting address to the disciples. They sought to gain entrance to the house, but it was crowded to overflowing. Finally, they established themselves on the back porch and had word passed into Jesus from person to person, so that it finally was whispered to him by Simon Peter, who interrupted his talking for good purpose, and who said, Behold, your mother and your brothers are outside. and they are very anxious to speak with you. Now, it did not occur to his mother how important was the giving of this parting message to his followers. Neither did she know that his address was likely to be terminated at any moment by the arrival of his apprehenders. She really saw after so long an apparent estrangement in view of the fact that she and his brothers had shown grace actually unto him, that Jesus would cease speaking and come to them the moment he received word that they were ready.
Always people thinking of themselves, right? That's exactly what she was doing. It is just another of those instances in which his earth family could not comprehend that he must be about his Father's business. And so Mary and his brothers were deeply hurt when, notwithstanding that he paused in his speaking to receive the message, instead of rushing out to greet them, they heard his musical voice speak with increased volume. Say to my mother and my brothers that they should have no fear for me. The Father who sent me into the world will not forsake me, neither shall any harm come upon my family. Bid them to be of good courage and put their trust in the Father of the kingdom. But after all, who is my mother and who are my brothers? And stretching forth his hands toward his disciples assembled in the room, he said, I have no mother, I have no brothers. Behold my mother, and behold my brethren. For whosoever does the will of the Father who is in heaven, the same is my mother, my brother, and my sister. Okay, so he's put what's important out there first, right? His mission for God, above even his own family. And that is hard to do for us, right?
And when Mary heard these words, she collapsed in Jude's arms. They carried her out in the garden to revive her, while Jesus spoke the concluding words of his parting message. He would then have gone out to confer with his mother and his brothers, but a messenger arrived in haste from Tiberias, bringing word that the officers of the Sanhedrin were on their way with authority to arrest Jesus and carry him to Jerusalem. Andrew received this message and, interrupting Jesus, told it to him.
So they were on their way to the house to arrest him, right? Right, Rodney, would you take the next one?
Andrew did not recall that David had posted some 25 sentinels about the Zebedee house, and that no one could take them by surprise. So he asked Jesus, what should be done? The master stood there in silence, while his mother, having heard the words, quote, I have no mother, was recovering from the shock of the garden. It was at just this time that a woman in the room stood up and exclaimed, blessed is the woman that bore you, and blessed are the breasts that nursed you. Jesus turned aside a moment from his conversation with Andrew to answer this woman by saying, no, rather is the one blessed who hears the word of God and dares to obey it.
Always going back to his mission, right? Stephen, would you take the next one, please?
Okay. Mary and Jesus' brothers thought that Jesus did not understand them, that he had lost interest in them, little realizing that it was they who failed to understand Jesus. Jesus fully understood how difficult it is for men to break with their past. He knew how human beings are swayed by the creature's elements, how conscious responds to emotional appeal as mind does to logic and reason, but he also knew how far more difficult it is to persuade man to disown the past.
Bill, would you take the next one, please?
Okay? It is forever true that all who may think they are misunderstood or not appreciated have in Jesus a sympathizing friend and an understanding counselor. He had warned his apostles that man supposed that a man's foes may be they of his own household. But he had hardly realized how near this prediction would come to apply to his own experience. Jesus did not forsake his own family to do his Father's work. They forsook him. Later on, after the Master's death and resurrection, when James became connected with the early Christian movement, he suffered immeasurably as a result of his failure to enjoy the earlier association with Jesus and his disciples.
So he missed out greatly not following his brother, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bill, you take the next one.
Yes. In passing through these events, Jesus chose to be guided by the limited knowledge of his human mind. He decided to undergo the experience with his associates as a mere man. And it was in the human mind of Jesus to see his family before he left. He did not wish to stop in the midst of his discourse and thus render their first meeting after so long a separation such a public affair. He had intended to finish his address and then have a visit with them before leaving, but this plan was thwarted by a conspiracy of events which immediately followed.
Remember last time we were talking about the minds of Jesus, the Michael mind as opposed to the Jesus mind, right? This is what they're talking about here. He chose to be limited by his knowledge of only his human experience rather than drawing from his experience being Michael, the son of Michael of Nebadon, right? And that's what we were talking about last week a little bit, right?
I think he had to do that to go through this.
That's right, to experience it fully.
If he used his Bible, it would not have happened.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay. The haste of their flight was augmented by the arrival of a party of David's messengers at the rear entrance of the Zebedee home. The commotion produced by these men frightened the apostles into thinking that these new arrivals might be their apprehenders, and in fear of immediate arrest, they hastened through the front entrance to the waiting boat. And all of this explains why Jesus did not see his family waiting on the back porch. They were in fear of being arrested. Right?
But he did say to David Zebedee as he entered the boat in hasty flight, "Tell my mother and my brothers that I appreciate their coming, and that I intended to see them. Admonish them to find no offense in me, but rather to seek for a knowledge of the will of God, and for grace and courage to do that will."
What a response, right? Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
7. The hasty flood. And so it was on this same morning, the 22nd of May, in the year AD 29, that Jesus, with his 12 apostles and the 12 evangelists, engaged in this hasty flight from the Sanhedrin officers who were on their way to Bethsaida with authority from Herod Antipas to arrest him and take him to Jerusalem for trial on charges of blasphemy and other violations of the sacred laws of the Jews. It was almost 8:30 this beautiful morning when this company of 25 manned the oars and pulled for the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee.
So they just got away, right? All right. Stephen, you take the next one, please?
All right. Following the master's boat was another and smaller craft, containing 6 of David's messengers, who had instructions to maintain contact with Jesus and his associates, and receive an information of their whereabouts and safety was regularly transmitted to the home of Zebedee and Urantia, which had served as headquarters for the work of the kingdom for some time. But Jesus was never again to make his home at the house of Zebedee, From now on, throughout the remainder of his earth life, the master truly had not where to lay his head. No more did he have even the semblance of a settled abode.
So he's constantly moving from that time onwards. Bill, did you get
Okay? They rode over to near the village of Coita, put their boat in the custody of Quinn, and began the wanderings of this eventful last year of the Master's life on earth. For a time, they remained in the domains of Philip, going from Coita up to Caesarea Philippi, then making their way over to the coast of Phoenicia.
Billy, did you take the next one, please?
The crowd lingered about the home of Zebedee, watching these two boats make their way over the lake toward the eastern shore. And they were well started when the Jerusalem officer came in and began the search for Jesus. They refused to believe that he was sleeping. And while Jesus and his party were journeying northward toward Bethania, the Pharisees and the assistant police officer forwarded nameless searching for him in the neighborhood of Capernaum.
So they stayed in Capernaum looking for him everywhere, not realizing he had left. Right? Jesus' family returned to their home in Capernaum and spent almost a week in talking, debating, and praying. They were filled with confusion and consternation. They enjoyed no peace of mind until Thursday afternoon when Ruth returned from a visit to the Zebedee house, where she learned from David that her brother was safe and in good health and making his way toward the Phoenician coast. And that's it. And next time we'll take on paper 155, Fleeing Through Northern Galilee. Let's have a little prayer and we'll quit for tonight. Rodney, would you like to close us in prayer today?
All right, Heavenly Father, we are very thankful for the opportunity that we've had this evening to study this fantastic revelation in the Urantia Book. And Father, we thank you that Roger and Diane have given a bit of time to make this study possible. And we give you the praise, Father, and we ask for guidance and wisdom as we try and share these truths with other people. And Father, we give you the praise, and we ask this in Jesus' name, Michael Nebadon. Amen.
Amen. And thank you again for joining us at home. Please come see us again.